Into the Spider-Verse swung into theatres in 2018. It was incredibly well received, won Best Animated Feature at the Academy Awards, and to this day is often regarded as the best Spider-Man movie. No Way Home swung into theatres in 2021. It was incredibly well received, went on to become the 6th highest grossing film of all time, and is often described by many people as a very unique theatrical experience. However, the dust has settled. That initial hype for seeing all these old characters return has now worn off, and I think it's time to view this movie through a more critical lens. So today, I shall be comparing both Into the Spider-Verse and No Way Home, analysing their similarities and arrive at a conclusion on which one is the gold standard when it comes to overall storytelling. So with that being said, and without further ado, let's jump right into this. Let's begin with what kickstarts the plot of both these movies, the characters who cause these different dimensions to collide. In Spider-Verse, this is all caused by Kingpin. His motivation for activating this machine is due to the death of his family, who were escaping after witnessing him beating up Spider-Man, and as a result of going full speed, they end up in a traffic collision. And his reason for opening up the multiverse is so that he can be with an alternate version of his family from a different dimension. And despite the cause of their deaths ultimately being his fault, this premise is an easy way to still sympathise with his character. However, even with this in mind, the act of opening up the multiverse is still a selfish action, as utilising the collider will put everyone else in the city in grave danger.
You don't know what it can do, you'll kill us all!
Now this absolutely works for a premise in this movie, because Kingpin is a villain. No matter how tragic his background is, there is no justification for him to go ahead with using this machine. And this is where our hero, Spider-Man, steps in. He fights off the Prowler and a giant green goblin, and subsequently gets his head pushed into the centre of the collider, alerting spider people from all different dimensions. All of this is an excellent start to the story. A clear motivation from our villain, determination to save the day from our hero, and a logical reason as to why other spider people are now going to get roped into this universe. Now let's contrast this with No Way Home. The prior MCU Spider-Man film ends with Peter's identity being revealed by Mysterio. No Way Home picks up directly from where Far From Home left off. There's now mass panic as everyone knows who Spider-Man is, and also believes that he is the one responsible for the drone attack in London. And everyone else close to Peter is now suffering as a result. So he takes it upon himself to pay a visit to a fellow superhero, Doctor Strange. When they meet, Peter explains the situation.
When Mysterio revealed my identity, my entire life got screwed up, and I was wondering, I mean, I don't really know if this would actually work, but I was wondering if maybe you could go back in time and make it so that he never did.
And Strange responds with a sensible counter.
We tampered with the stability of space-time to resurrect countless lives. Do you want to do it again now just because yours got messy?
It's not about me. I mean, this is really hurting a lot of people. My Aunt May, Happy, my best friend, my girlfriend, their futures are ruined just because they know me and they've done nothing wrong.
I am so sorry, but even if I wanted to, I don't have the time stone anymore.
I'm really sorry if I've wasted your time. Just
No, you didn't.
forget about it, please.
Oh, he will. He's very good at forgetting things.
Strange then has a light bulb moment, and mentions a spell that he knows that won't turn back time, but will make sure that everyone forgets who Spider-Man is. Now the idea of brainwashing the whole universe can certainly be questioned on an ethical level, but even with that aside, casting this spell could have consequences.
That spell travels the dark borders between known and unknown reality. It's too dangerous.
Sound familiar?
You don't know what it can do, you'll kill us all!
And despite all the warning signs, Strange proceeds with the spell. Now as hyperbolic as this may sound, I would not hesitate in calling this a clear moment of character assassination for Doctor Strange. In previous films he was often seen as the voice of reason. These examples in both Avengers Infinity War and Endgame demonstrate this very well. Before Thanos arrives on Titan, Strange is going forward in time to calculate the possible outcomes of our heroes' winning. Out of 14 million scenarios, our heroes only win one of them. And despite all the warning signs, Strange proceeds with the spell. Now as hyperbolic as this may sound, I would not hesitate in calling this a clear moment of character assassination for Doctor Strange. In previous films he was often seen as the voice of reason. These examples in both Avengers Infinity War and Endgame demonstrate this very well. Before Thanos arrives on Titan, Strange is going forward in time to calculate the possible outcomes of our heroes' winning. Out of 14 million scenarios, our heroes only win one of them. Now, as nonsensical as these odds are, it does work for motivating our characters and showing us what they are willing to sacrifice for the betterment of the galaxy. Fast forward to Endgame and it turns out this one possibility of victory involves Iron Man's death. Again, very nonsensical odds, but character-wise this is great not only for Tony but also for Strange, as he understands that the noble sacrifice of one person is worth the price for saving the universe. And in No Way Home the stakes aren't anywhere near as high, and yet he's willing to risk everything in order to help Peter and those close to him, despite knowing the possible consequences of doing so. But unfortunately, this only gets worse. When casting the spell, Strange decides to have Peter in the room, which is okay in theory. But then Peter starts asking a bunch of questions, and lists people that he still wants knowing him as Spider-Man. Now, if a simple question, followed by a brief list of names, is enough to throw off the spell, then Strange should not have Peter in the room in the first place. Instead, there should have been a conversation beforehand to lay out all the information.
Did it work?
No. You changed my spell 6 times.
5 times.
You changed my spell. You don't do that. I told you, and that is why.
That spell was completely out of control. If
If I hadn't shut it down, something catastrophic could have happened.
So now that Peter has been the one to supposedly ruin this spell, it has alerted every villain that knows Peter Parker as Spider-Man from different dimensions.
that little spell that you botched where you wanted everyone to forget that Peter Parker's Spider-Man, it started pulling in everyone who knows Peter Parker's Spider-Man from every universe into this one.
And Strange is very direct with that line. Everyone who knows Peter Parker as Spider-Man. The film then later breaks its own continuity by acknowledging that Electro has no idea what Andrew's Spider-Man looks like underneath the mask.
You got a nice face, you're just a kid. You from Queens, you got that suit, you help a lot of poor people. I just thought you was gonna be black.
Oh man, I'm sorry.
Don't apologize, there's gotta be a black Spider-Man somewhere out there.
At this point, it's all been seen as Peter's mess, even though Strange is equal if not more to blame. MJ is the only person to counter this later in the film and says that Strange deserves at least a share of the blame.
You're telling us what to do even though it was your spell that got screwed up, meaning that all this is kinda your mess.
But it doesn't matter how aware the film is of this. At the end of the day, it's still a complete character assassination of Doctor Strange, as none of this should have taken place. Especially given what was established about his character in prior MCU films. Many people, including myself, were hoping for a Nick Fury Skrull twist like in the previous Spider-Man film, therefore meaning all of these actions wouldn't be against Strange as a character. Unfortunately, that wasn't the case, and Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness confirms that. When comparing the initial plot in both these films, it's clear to see which one holds up. One film is about a selfish act carried out by a villain who doesn't care for the consequences of linking dimensions. The other movie contains an established hero who 180s on his principles from prior films, all in service of kickstarting the plot. Spider-Verse has got a blank canvas to tell its story on, and maintains a logical through line before getting to the more novelty aspects. No Way Home is a movie in a long-running franchise that completely assassinates an integral character, primarily to get to these novelty aspects. So now that we've spoken about how these films establish their dimension-clashing events, let's talk about the main selling point of these movies. This of course being the novelty of seeing a group of spider people teaming up on screen. In the run-up to No Way Home, there was so much anticipation surrounding the return of Tobey and Andrew's Spider-Man. The trailers did not reveal anything about these two characters, but judging by the way this film was combining the old with the new, it was obvious they would return. And it was a grand return. To cycle through 3 different Spider-Men in just under a decade is a lot. The character plays such a huge part in pop culture. Everyone has their own personal favourite, but to see them all together would be amazing. And that's exactly what it was for so many people, including myself. And to this day, I still enjoy the moments they share together. But now that time has passed, I feel these interactions are a lot more hollow than I first realised. And so many of said interactions rely heavily on your knowledge of these past movies, rather than being a coherent story on its own terms. So let's break this down. Ned and MJ have been entrusted from Peter to utilize Strange's sling ring, which they can use to open up portals. And at the low point of the film, just after Peter has lost his Aunt May, they use this sling ring to try and locate him, but instead they get to a different Peter Parker, Andrew Garfield's Peter Parker. And what surprised me was the absolute lack of surprise from Andrew, and revealing his face and identity straight away is not something I believe his character would do.
Who the hell are you?
I'm Peter Parker.
That's not possible.
I am Spider-Man in my world. But then yesterday, I was just here.
I am aware that he does unmask himself in his original movie, but the context there was completely different. When fighting the lizard on a bridge, he is forced to let him get away as a random person shouts,
Somebody help! Help me, my kid is trapped!
Andrew then swings down to save him, sees the kid is understandably freaking out and won't calm down, given the extremely dangerous scenario that he's in. But they must work together in order to get out of this. So Andrew reveals his face to show that he's just a normal guy, to add some sense of relatability. Unfortunately, the car catches fire from the fuel dropping down, and Andrew must hold the car with his strength whilst the kid climbs out, wearing the Spider-Man mask as the confidence booster, until they're eventually both safe and sound. The context of these situations are completely different. One is a justified reason to help a child in a dangerous situation, even if you wanted to argue that the escalation of events seem nonsensical. The important detail is that the child's life is the priority, and if Andrew needs to reveal his identity in order to save him, that far outweighs any potential risk here. And the other is done not for the sake of the other characters, but for the audience to get excited at viewing Andrew Garfield's beautiful face on screen once again. And stating his full name was just the cherry on top.
Who the hell are you?
I'm Peter Parker.
That's not possible.
I am Spider-Man.
Who are you?
Spider-Man.
And after Andrew's entry, MJ has a light bulb moment.
So, I opened the wrong portal to the wrong Peter Parker.
Yeah, I guess you just keep doing it until we find the real one.
Wink wink, nudge nudge. And of course, we then meet Tobey Maguire. Another exhilarating moment for most audience members. But hold on a second. You've done this twice, attempting to find Tom Holland's Peter. But why stop there? Surely if that's the aim, you would just keep going until you find him.
So, I opened the wrong portal to the wrong Peter Parker.
Yeah, I guess you just keep doing it until we find the real one.
And even if none of the next dozen Spider-Men include him, then at least you'll have a dozen Spider-Men to help you out. Oh, wait, yeah, I forgot. I guess MJ is like us, the audience, and knows that there are only 2 mainstream live-action Spider-Men prior to Tom. Yeah, I guess that checks out. Now, as much as I've poked fun at this, I would happily let this slide if the characters behaved the way I'd expect them to. But unfortunately, Tobey, much like Andrew, gets along with these characters way too quickly. They should be a lot more freaked out by this situation and should be asking many questions. Especially given how grounded both the Sam Raimi and Mark Webb films are in comparison to the crazy magical stuff in the MCU. All 5 of those movies are about the friendly neighborhood Spider-Man, being heroic in New York and defeating supervillains on a much smaller scale. The idea of either of these characters coming through a portal and entering a different dimension should be extremely mind-blowing.
String theory, multidimensional reality, and matter displacement. All real?
Now that Ned and MJ have met these other spider dudes, they discuss where Tom's Peter would be whilst mourning the death of Aunt May. They meet on the rooftop and try to pick Tom back up, as he is currently at his lowest. Overall, I think this scene is great. Setup. I like the idea of a conversation surrounding how they all relate to each other, and I especially liked Andrew's line about how he became a lot more aggressive towards his enemies after Gwen Stacy's death.
Couldn't save her. I'm never gonna be able to forgive myself for that. But I carried on, tried to keep going, try to keep being the that friendly neighborhood Spider-Man, because I know that's what she would have wanted. But at some point, I stopped pulling my punches. I got rageful. I got bitter. I just don't want you to end up like me.
It's a good character moment that fills in the gaps between these movies and seems perfectly logical. This film has some really interesting ideas about where these Spider-Men are in their own lives, but unfortunately these aspects are not explored with any kind of depth, mostly due to how much ground this film needs to cover before we get to the finale. For this to be more effective, there needed to be more breathing room, more questions, more conversations, rather than just assumptions about how their lives are likely similar, despite key differences clearly being established. Now let's compare to Spider-Verse. This film actually has 6 Spider-People, but highlights its main 3 as Miles Morales, our main protagonist who's trying to learn the ropes of being Spider-Man, Peter B. Parker, who's here to step in for the fallen Spider-Man, and is also here to pick Miles back up and show him the ropes.
We're a little team. Me as the teacher who could still do it. You as the student who can do it, just not as good. I'm proud of us.
And we have Gwen Stacy, the cool Spider-Woman who has become very independent in recent times due to prioritizing her great responsibility and keeping people at a distance for their own safety. We then have the 3 side characters, Spider-Man Noir, Penny Parker, and Peter Porker, who are awesome in their own ways, but are still intended to be side characters. And in this film, the Spider-People appear at different times and are slowly and naturally integrated into the story. Gwen is the first to be introduced by figuring out where she is, going to school to blend in, and trying to get close with Miles when she can sense that he's going to be similar to her once he's obtained his powers. Second to be introduced is Peter B. Parker. He gets pulled through the portal whilst eating Joe's pizza. Once he's in a different dimension, he sees the beautiful blonde Peter Parker of this universe has died, and out of complete shock, he lifts up his mask. Which, whilst it's quite unnecessary, I believe this instance is far more forgiving than Andrew's entry. Peter B already has a rough idea of what's going down, and understands the Spider-Man here has died. His identity is all over the news, and therefore there's no real consequence for Peter B to take his mask off. Anyway, we later meet the other Spider-People at the Spider Lair, once everyone has independently figured out what's going on. And the interactions here flow so much better, as we've already seen a natural progression of these characters getting to know each other, especially when it comes to Miles and Peter B bonding. It's then safe to assume these other characters have interacted in a similar way.
How did you get here?
Well, it's kind of a long story. Maybe not that long.
The way I feel towards these 3 side characters is essentially the way I feel towards Toby and Andrew. Sure, I love what I see of them, but at the end of the day, Spider-Verse acknowledges these guys as side characters. And because of the presentation of these introductions thus far, the film pretty much tells us these origins are exactly the same, but in a comedic way.
I frolic and I dance and I do this with my pants and my—
enough!
Later in the film, after losing his Uncle Aaron, Miles, much like Tom Holland's Peter, is grieving over the death. This is where the Spider-People come in and try to pick him back up. And this scene will also decide whether or not Miles can prove himself as a worthy Spider-Man. The execution in this scene is so much stronger than the rooftop scene in No Way Home. Despite playing out in a fairly similar way, Gwen and Peter B have gotten to know Miles very well at this point. There's already a shared understanding and shared experiences that support this.
We've all been there. For me, it was my Uncle Ben.
For me, it was my Uncle Benjamin.
For me, it was my father.
For me, it was my best friend.
Miles, the hardest thing about this job is you can't always save everybody.
Like if it was my fault, you wouldn't understand.
Miles, we're probably the only ones who do understand.
Miles and the audience have been told of their origins. Therefore, when our characters try comforting Miles, there is an understanding as to how these Spider-People relate to each other. It doesn't come out of left field, it happens much later in the film, and isn't simply relying on the audience's meta-knowledge. These characters are well informed and know that they relate to each other, making this scene a lot more impactful. So we've spoken a lot about the more serious moments in both movies, but of course, Spider-Verse is a very fun, family-friendly, comedic film, and with No Way Home fitting into the MCU, it of course injects a lot of humour, often a lot of unnecessary humour. And No Way Home, much like Into the Spider-Verse, contains a lot of reference humour. And it's very hit and miss in this film. A joke that a lot of people disliked even based on the trailer was the one about Doc Ock's name.
What was your name again?
Dr. Otto Octavius.
Wait, no, seriously, what's your actual name?
Not only does it feel like it's making such a fantastic villain from a superior Spider-Man film seem very silly, but it's also a confusing joke given all the weird and wacky names already present in the Marvel Universe. Spider-Man 2002 did a much better job with this kind of joke, poking fun at a name which is actually bad, whilst birthing one that is very good.
What's your name, kid?
The Human Spider.
The Human Spider, that's it? That's the best you got?
Yeah.
Oh, that sucks.
The Amazing Spider-Man!
Or a more direct comparison would be the better version of this joke in Spider-Man 2.
What are we gonna call this guy?
Dr. Octopus.
That's crap.
Science Squid?
Crap.
Doctor Strange.
That's pretty good, but it's taken. I got it. Dr. Octopus.
I like it.
Of course you do.
But there are some good jokes in No Way Home, one of which being about their spider webs, with Andrew and Tom creating their own web fluid, and Tobey's being a lot more, natural.
So you make your own web fluid in your body?
I'd rather not talk about this.
No, I don't mean to.
Are you teasing me?
No. He's not teasing you. It's just that we can't do that. So naturally, we're curious as to how your web situation works. Like, does it just come out of your wrists, or does it come out of anywhere else?
But the meta references are not all done purely for comedic effect. The three Spider-Men also discuss various villains they've fought over the years.
What are, like, some of the craziest villains that you guys have fought?
Tobey references Venom, and Tom references fighting an alien in space, to which Tobey is incredibly surprised.
I'm still like that you fought an alien in space.
So let me get this straight. He's entered a different dimension through a portal, and wasn't very fazed by that. But fighting an alien in space is such a huge surprise? Okay. And lastly, Andrew references how he fought Rhino.
I'm lame compared. I fought a Russian guy in a rhinoceros machine.
And Tobey is quick to counter this by telling him how amazing he is.
Can we rewind it back to the I'm lame part? Because you are not.
No, thanks. No, yeah, I appreciate that. I'm not saying I'm lame.
But
I'm
it's
just saying
the self-talk. Maybe we should, you know.
Listen.
Because you're amazing. Just to take it in for a minute.
Yeah. I can take it in. No, I can take it in.
You are amazing.
I can take it in.
You are amazing.
Thank you.
Andrew is a superb actor. And a great thing that No Way Home gets right is showing us that he is an amazing Spider-Man. It was the bad material that let him down. But the issue with Tobey's line is that it comes across as way too meta. He has no clue what his life is like, and it feels weird for him to assume this based on such limited interactions. The Raimi films were of course far superior, and were often compared to the web films when they released. A decade later, and this still stands. But simply showing the Spider-Men on screen together will show the audience that these three guys are all great in their own way. We do not need such an overt meta line to tell us that. Most of my complaints for this film in relation to its characters has been the vagueness in their chemistry, but ironically I feel this is a rare instance where the film overshares information. Alright people, let's do this one last time and compare to Into the Spider-Verse. The vast majority of the meta references and humour is done in the opening of this movie, which is approximately 2 minutes and 50 seconds, and is extremely clever in its execution. It recreates shots of previous movies, pokes fun at the sillier moments of previous movies, and quickly runs through all the beats you would expect to see from a typical Spider-Man origin movie.
Alright, let's do this one last time.
And after such a great introduction, the film pulls out the rug from underneath us and kills off the main Spider-Man. With the main Peter Parker dead, Peter B now has to fill in those boots, and act as a mentor for Miles, but is extremely reluctant to at first. Miles tries convincing him to change his mind by feeding him the line we've all heard a million times before.
With great power comes
Don't
great...
you dare finish that sentence. Don't do it. I'm sick of it.
Spider-Verse is an absolute joy to watch for anyone who's been a fan of this character for a good while. To see all these references presented in a clever or funny way, whilst flipping certain aspects on their head where appropriate, provides for a very engaging experience, expecting a lot of things from this story, whilst also having expectations subverted. No Way Home can often come across as a checklist.
I can help you. You know, I'm something of a scientist myself.
They don't quite have the same clever setup and payoff like Spider-Verse. Things are often referenced and then quickly moved past, whilst the Spider-Verse references are either clever jokes or have an actual purpose to its own story. No Way Home feels like fan service to please its audience, which is ultimately a good thing. But unfortunately, after a first experience, these references will not connect with people as much when they see them coming. Spider-Verse continues to connect with people as these references are integral to the main plotline. So, to conclude this video, I think it's extremely clear to see which one is the gold standard when it comes to overall storytelling. When comparing both Spider-Verse and No Way Home side by side, it's evident that Spider-Verse has a much more coherent plot, more chemistry between its main cast of characters, and functions a lot better as a Spider-Man movie whilst referencing previous installments. However, that does not mean that I don't enjoy both movies a lot. Both are extremely entertaining throughout. With that being said, I also value the quality of writing. I like exploring why my favourite pieces of media are so well written, and often there's a piece of media that comes out that I can still find the same levels of enjoyment in, but clearly have flaws in their script, and I find exploring those flaws to be equally as interesting. Hopefully what I've done today is shine a light on how ideas for your story can be great and fun for the audience, but the execution of these ideas are always going to be more important, and will make the story hold up long term. I've been your host, That Other George, and thank you for watching.